The rain hammered against the windows of the small farmhouse like angry fists, each drop carrying the weight of a November storm that had been building for days. Inside, 7-year-old Dorothy Mae Harrison sat at her kitchen table, staring at the single can of soup that represented everything she had left in the world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The can was dented, generic brand, marked down to 89 cents at the discount grocery store where she'd spent her last $2 3 days ago. Chicken noodle, Harold's favorite. She turned it over in her weathered hands, reading the nutrition label she'd memorized, calculating portions she couldn't afford to miscalculate. One can, maybe two small bowls if she watered it down, maybe enough for tonight and tomorrow morning if she was careful. If she was lucky. Dorothy had been careful her whole life. Careful with money, careful with words, careful with hope. But careful hadn't been enough to save Harold from the cancer that took him 8 months ago. Careful hadn't been enough to pay for the treatments insurance wouldn't cover. And careful certainly hadn't been enough to keep the medical bills from swallowing their small farm and everything they'd built in 42 years of marriage. The foreclosure notice was still taped to her front door, where the sheriff had left it yesterday morning. Bright yellow paper that might as well have been a death certificate. 30 days to vacate. 30 days to figure out where a 7-year-old widow with arthritis and a high school education goes when she's lost everything. If you believe that kindness still exists in the darkest moments, that people can surprise you when you least expect it, and that sometimes angels wear leather instead of wings, then pause for a moment. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel, and tell us in the comments below where you're watching from tonight. Because what happened next in Dorothy's kitchen would restore your faith in humanity and prove that sometimes the roughest exteriors hide the gentlest hearts. Dorothy Mae Harrison had lived in that farmhouse for 42 years. She'd come there as a bride at 25, young and full of dreams about the life she and Harold would build together. They'd planned to raise children in that house, fill it with laughter and birthday parties and Christmas mornings. But the children never came, and instead of growing a family, they'd grown old together, just the two of them and the land they loved. Harold had been a good man. Quiet, steady, the kind of husband who brought her coffee in bed every morning and still held her hand when they watched television at night. He'd worked construction, honest work with honest pay, and Dorothy had kept the books for 3 local businesses from her kitchen table. Together, they'd made enough. Not rich, never rich, but enough. Enough to pay the mortgage, enough to fix the roof when it leaked, enough to take a weekend trip to the lake once a year for their anniversary. Enough to be content. But cancer doesn't care about contentment. Cancer doesn't care about modest savings accounts or paid-off trucks or couples who've never asked for more than they could earn. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in March, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And by that afternoon, their careful life began unraveling like a sweater with a pulled thread. The treatments were experimental, expensive, not covered by Medicare. Harold fought like hell for 18 months, and Dorothy fought right beside him, selling everything they owned piece by piece to pay for another round of chemotherapy, another week in the hospital, another chance. First went Harold's tools, the collection he'd spent 30 years building. Then her grandmother's china. Then the good furniture, the wedding rings, the truck, and finally, piece by piece, the farm itself. 40 acres sold to developers who would probably build a shopping center where Harold's vegetable garden used to grow. Harold passed on a Thursday morning in February, holding Dorothy's hand, telling her he was sorry for leaving her with nothing. She told him not to worry, that she'd be fine, that love was worth more than money. And she'd meant it. In that moment, with his hand in hers and his breath growing shallow, she'd meant every word, but meaning it and living it were two different things. Now, 8 months later, Dorothy understood the weight of being alone in a world that moved too fast for widows with empty bank accounts. The part-time job at the hardware store had ended when the owner's nephew needed work. Social Security paid $847 a month, barely enough to cover utilities and medication. The medical bills kept coming, relentless as the rain, And even though Harold was gone, his treatments were still being paid for in installments that would outlive them both. She'd learned to shop at the day-old bakery bin, to buy generic everything, to make a pound of hamburger last a week. She'd learned to keep the heat at 62 degrees and wear Harold's old sweaters around the house. She'd learned to ignore the phone when debt collectors called and to check the mail with the kind of dread usually reserved for terminal diagnoses. But tonight, sitting at the kitchen table with that single can of soup, Dorothy had reached the end of careful. Tomorrow was November 15th. Her Social Security check wouldn't come until the 3rd of December. She had no family left, no children to call, no siblings still living. Harold's brother lived in Arizona and hadn't spoken to them since the funeral. The can of soup represented her last stand against hunger, against despair, against the growing certainty that she might not make it through the winter. But Dorothy Mae Harrison had survived the Great Depression as a child, had buried her parents, and her husband and most of her friends. She'd survived 42 years of Harold's snoring and his terrible jokes and his habit of leaving his socks on the bedroom floor. She could survive this too. She had to. Outside, the storm was getting worse. The wind was howling through the oak trees Harold had planted when they were newlyweds, the same trees that would probably be cut down when the developers came. The power had flickered twice in the last hour, and Dorothy knew if it went out completely, she'd be in real trouble. The backup generator had been sold 6 months ago. She was just reaching for the can opener when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. A mechanical roar that cut through the wind and rain like a chainsaw through silence. A motorcycle. Dorothy froze, her hand halfway to the drawer. Nobody rode motorcycles in weather like this. Nobody rode motorcycles down her dirt road at all, especially not at 9:30 at night. Her farmhouse sat 2 miles from the main highway, down a gravel road that most people missed even in daylight. The sound grew louder, closer, and then suddenly stopped, right outside her house. Dorothy's heart began to beat faster. She lived alone, miles from her nearest neighbor, with no phone service because she couldn't afford to keep it connected. The closest house was the Johnson place, a half-mile through the woods, and they were in Florida for the winter. She heard footsteps on her porch, heavy boots on wet wood. Then silence. Dorothy sat perfectly still, barely breathing, hoping whoever it was would go away, hoping they'd realize they'd made a mistake and get back on their motorcycle and disappear into the storm. But then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps on her front door. Dorothy's mind raced through possibilities. None of them good. Lost traveler, criminal, someone looking for Harold who didn't know he was dead, someone looking for money she didn't have. Someone looking for trouble she couldn't handle. The knock came again. Harder this time, more insistent. Dorothy stood slowly, her arthritic knees protesting, and walked to the living room window. She pulled the curtain back just enough to peek outside, and what she saw made her gasp. A motorcycle, big and black and chrome, parked in her gravel driveway. And on her porch, hunched against the rain, stood the largest man she'd ever seen. He was easily 6.5 feet tall, broader than her door frame, wearing a leather jacket that was soaked through. His long hair was plastered to his head, and even in the dim light from her porch lamp, she could see he was shivering violently. But it was what she saw on his back that made her heart skip. As he turned slightly, she caught sight of the patch on his vest. The unmistakable insignia she'd seen on television, in newspapers, in stories that made her lock her doors and check her windows twice. Hell's Angels. Dorothy stepped back from the window, her hand flying to her chest. Hell's Angel. On her porch. In the middle of a November storm, every news story she'd ever heard, every warning, every stereotype crashed through her mind in a wave of panic. But then the man turned toward the window, and in the yellow glow of the porch light, Dorothy saw his face. He wasn't sneering or threatening or looking for trouble. He was exhausted, desperate. The kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from riding too far in weather too harsh for too long. His lips had a bluish tinge that spoke of hypothermia setting in. His hands, when he raised them to knock again, were shaking so badly he could barely control them. This wasn't a criminal looking for victims. This was a man who might die if he didn't get warm soon. The knock came a third time, weaker now, as if even that simple motion was draining what little strength he had left. Dorothy looked at the foreclosure notice still taped to her door, at the empty refrigerator behind her, at the single can of soup on her kitchen table. She thought about Harold, about what he would do, about the man she'd married who never met a stranger and never turned away someone in need. She thought about the 42 years they'd spent in this house, the memories built into every room, the life they'd created from nothing but love and determination. And she thought about how, in just 30 days, none of it would matter anyway. If this was going to be one of her last nights in the only home she'd ever known, she wasn't going to spend it being afraid. Dorothy walked to the front door, flipped on the porch light, and opened it. The man looked up, and Dorothy saw that up close he was even more imposing than she'd thought. Not just tall and broad, but weathered in a way that spoke of a hard life lived outdoors. Scars on his knuckles, lines around his eyes, a gray beard that was currently dripping rainwater onto her porch. But his eyes, when they met hers, held no threat. Only relief and surprise and something that looked almost like shame. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough and chattering with cold. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry to bother you. I know how this looks. I know what you're thinking." He held up his hands in a gesture of surrender, and Dorothy could see the advanced stages of frostbite setting in. His fingers were white and purple in patches, swollen and clumsy. "My bike broke down about 5 miles back," he continued, forcing the words out between shivers. "I've been walking in this storm for 2 hours. I saw your light, and I just need a call for help. A tow truck. Anything. I'll pay you for the phone call. I'll wait outside." Dorothy looked at this mountain of a man, this Hell's Angel, who was asking permission to use her phone, who was offering to pay, who was volunteering to wait in the freezing rain rather than impose on her hospitality. And she made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Don't be ridiculous," she said, stepping back from the door. "Come inside before you freeze to death." The man's eyes widened in shock. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but I don't want to frighten you. I know what the vest means. I know what people think when they see it." "What I think," Dorothy said firmly, "is that you're half frozen and I'm not going to watch someone die on my porch. Now come inside." He hesitated for another moment, then stepped across the threshold into her small living room. Water immediately began pooling on her worn carpet, but Dorothy didn't care. The man was shaking so violently she could hear his teeth chattering. "What's your name?" she asked, closing the door behind him. "Tom," he said. "Tom Mitchell." "Ma'am, I want you to know I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm just trying to get home." "Where's home, Tom?" "Oregon. Portland. I was visiting my daughter in Denver. She just had a baby, my first grandchild." His voice caught slightly on the word grandchild, and Dorothy heard the love there, the pride, the gentleness that didn't match, the leather and patches. "Congratulations," she said, and meant it. "Boy or girl?" "Girl. Emma Rose. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Perfect little fingers, perfect little toes." Tom's face softened as he talked about his granddaughter, the harsh lines smoothing into something tender. Dorothy smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt in weeks. "That's a beautiful name. Now, let's get you warmed up before you catch pneumonia." She led him to the living room, where Harold's old recliner sat facing the television. It was the only piece of good furniture she hadn't sold, couldn't bring herself to sell because it still smelled like him. "Sit," she ordered, pointing to the chair. "I'll get you some blankets." Tom lowered himself carefully into the recliner, as if he was afraid his weight would break it. "Ma'am, this is very kind of you, but I just need to use your phone. I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing," Dorothy said, already heading toward the bedroom. "You're hypothermic. And my name is Dorothy, not ma'am." She returned with every blanket she owned, 3 thin ones, and Harold's old Army surplus sleeping bag from his military days. Tom accepted them gratefully, wrapping them around his massive frame. "I don't have a phone," Dorothy said, and Tom's face fell. Haven't been able to afford it for months. But there's a pay phone at the gas station about 8 miles down the highway. 8 miles, Tom repeated, his voice heavy with exhaustion. In this storm. In the morning, Dorothy said. When the weather clears. You're not going anywhere tonight. Tom started to protest, but Dorothy held up a hand. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. It's below freezing out there. You're soaked through, and that storm isn't letting up anytime soon. You'll die if you try to walk 8 miles in this weather. She was right, and they both knew it. Tom nodded slowly, settling back into the chair. I don't know how to thank you. Most people see the vest, and I'm not most people, Dorothy said simply. When's the last time you ate? Tom thought about it. Yesterday morning, I think. Maybe the day before. I've been trying to make it home on what money I had left. Dorothy nodded and walked back to the kitchen. She looked at the can of soup on the table. Her last meal, her final stand against hunger. Then she looked at Tom, wrapped in blankets in Harold's chair, a grandfather who just wanted to get home to tell people about his new granddaughter. She picked up the can opener without hesitation. When Tom smelled the soup heating on the stove, he appeared in the kitchen doorway. Dorothy, you don't need to cook for me. I'll be fine until morning. Sit down, Dorothy said, stirring the soup and adding water to stretch it further. You'll eat, and we'll both pretend this is a feast instead of canned soup and crackers. She set 2 bowls on the table, filled them both, though hers was noticeably smaller. She'd found a sleeve of saltines in the pantry, probably stale, but better than nothing. She poured 2 glasses of water and sat down across from Tom. This is, Tom started, then stopped, his voice thick with emotion. This is the kindest thing anyone's done for me in years. It's just soup, Dorothy said. No, Tom said quietly. It's not just soup. It's everything. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the storm outside and the gentle clink of spoons against bowls. Dorothy watched Tom eat, noticed how he savored each bite, how he made the small portion last. This was a man who understood hunger, who didn't take food for granted. Tell me about your granddaughter, Dorothy said. Tom's entire face transformed. She's perfect. Absolutely perfect. My daughter Sarah went through a rough patch a few years back. Drugs, bad relationships. I thought I'd lost her forever. But she got clean, met a good man, and now. He shook his head in wonder. Now I'm a grandfather. That must mean everything to you. It does. Sarah named me Emma's godfather. Asked if I'd help raise her, be part of her life. I said yes before she finished asking. Tom paused, looked down at his soup. I know what people think when they see the patch. They think we're all criminals, outlaws, dangerous men. And maybe some are. But most of us, we're just people trying to belong somewhere, trying to find family when the one we were born into didn't work out. Dorothy nodded. She understood about family, about belonging, about the bonds that form between people who need each other. Harold and I never had children, she said quietly. We tried for years, but it just wasn't meant to be. I used to think that made us incomplete somehow. But we had each other, and that was enough. Harold was your husband? 42 years. He died 8 months ago. Cancer. Dorothy's voice was steady, but Tom heard the grief underneath. I'm sorry. He was a good man. Would have liked you, I think. He always said you could tell a person's character by how they treated people who couldn't do anything for them. Dorothy smiled sadly. You offered to pay for a phone call and wait outside in a storm rather than make an old woman uncomfortable. That says something about your character. Tom was quiet for a long moment. My father was a mean drunk. Beat my mother, beat me and my sister until we were old enough to fight back. I swore I'd never be like him, never use my size to hurt people who couldn't defend themselves. Is that why you joined the Hells Angels? To find better family? Partly. And because they accept you for who you are, not who society thinks you should be. The brotherhood. It's real. When one of us is in trouble, the rest come running. No questions asked. Dorothy finished her soup, which wasn't much to finish. She'd given Tom the larger portion, and she was still hungry, but seeing him fed was worth more than a full stomach. Dorothy, Tom said, setting down his spoon. Can I ask you something? Of course. How are you doing? Really? Because this house, it's beautiful. But I can see you're struggling. The empty fridge, the furniture that's missing, the way you portioned that soup. You gave me your last meal, didn't you? Dorothy looked at this stranger, this Hell's Angel who saw too much, who understood poverty because he'd lived it himself. She could lie, pretend everything was fine, maintain the dignity she'd been clinging to for months. Instead, she told the truth. Harold's medical bills. We lost everything paying for treatments that didn't work. The house is in foreclosure. I have 30 days to find somewhere else to go, and I don't have anywhere to go. Her voice was matter-of-fact, calm. She cried all her tears months ago. Tom's jaw tightened. You gave me your last meal. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You needed it more than I did. Dorothy, that's... Tom stood up abruptly, began pacing the small kitchen. That's not right. That's not how this works. You're supposed to take care of yourself first. Especially at your age, especially when you have nothing. Says who? Says logic. Says survival instinct. Says common sense. Dorothy smiled. Harold used to say common sense was just fear dressed up in fancy clothes. He said the uncommon thing was always the right thing, even when it cost you something. Tom stopped pacing, looked at her across the small kitchen. He sounds like a wise man. He was. And he'd have done exactly what I did tonight. Fed a stranger, offered shelter, trusted that kindness comes back around somehow. And if it doesn't? What if kindness just leaves you hungry and alone? Dorothy considered this. Then at least you've been kind. That has to count for something. That night, Tom slept fitfully in Harold's recliner, wrapped in Dorothy's blankets, listening to the storm rage outside. But he wasn't just listening to the weather. He was thinking about the woman who'd opened her door to a stranger, who'd shared her last meal with someone she had every reason to fear. He was thinking about the foreclosure notice on the door, about empty refrigerators and medical bills that outlived the patients who incurred them. He was thinking about Dorothy eating a smaller portion so he could have more, about the dignity with which she'd told him about losing everything. And he was thinking about what the brotherhood meant, what the patch on his vest represented, what family was supposed to do when one of their own encountered something this important. At 5:30 in the morning, when the storm finally broke and pale gray light began filtering through the windows, Tom carefully extracted himself from the chair and walked to the kitchen. Dorothy was already awake, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee that smelled like it was made from reused grounds. "Morning," she said. "Coffee, please." Tom accepted the mug gratefully, though he could tell it was weak, stretched to last longer. "Dorothy, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." She raised an eyebrow. "Sounds serious." "It is? If someone wanted to help you, really help you, what would that look like? What would it take to keep you in this house, to make sure you had food and heat and medicine and whatever else you need?" Dorothy shook her head. "Tom, you can't. I'm not asking what I can do. I'm asking what help would look like if it came. Because I think it's going to come, and I want to make sure it's the right kind of help." Dorothy stared at him for a long moment. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "I know enough. I know you saved my life last night. I know you gave me everything you had when you had nothing to give. I know you're good people, and good people deserve good things." Dorothy was quiet for several minutes, thinking. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured. "The house payment is 3 months behind. That's about $3,800. The utilities are overdue, maybe $600. The medical bills, they'll keep coming forever. But if I could pay $100 a month, they'd stop threatening collection, and food, medicine, heat for the winter." She paused. "Maybe 8,000 total would get me through to spring, give me time to figure out something more permanent." Tom nodded, filing away every number. "And if someone wanted to do more? Wanted to make sure you never had to choose between medicine and food again?" "Tom, that's too much to ask anyone." "I'm not asking. I'm just gathering information." Tom stood up. walked to the window that looked out over the land Harold had loved. This place, it means something to you. Everything. It's all I have left of our life together. Then you should keep it. At 7 o'clock, Tom asked Dorothy to drive him to the gas station so he could use the payphone. She agreed, though her old car coughed and wheezed the entire 8 miles. While she waited in the car, Tom made 3 phone calls. The first was to a tow truck to collect his motorcycle. The second was to his daughter Sarah, to tell her he'd be delayed getting home but was safe. The third call lasted 47 minutes and would change Dorothy's life forever. Razor, the voice on the other end, answered. Marcus Razor Rodriguez, president of the Portland chapter of the Hells Angels, Tom's oldest friend and a man he'd trust with his life. Razor, it's Tom. I need the brotherhood. In 47 minutes, Tom told Razor everything. About the storm, the breakdown, the door that opened when it should have stayed closed. About Dorothy and Harold and 42 years of love that ended in medical bills and foreclosure notices. About soup made from nothing and shared with everything. About kindness that cost more than most people would ever pay. She gave you her last meal, Razor said when Tom finished. Her last meal. And I think if I'd asked for her bed, her coat, her medicine, she'd have given me those too. Jesus, Tom. What kind of person does that? The kind we're supposed to protect. The kind we're supposed to honor. The kind who proves there's still good in the world. Razor was quiet for a long moment. Tom could hear him thinking, calculating, planning. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. It was the voice of a president making a decision that would mobilize hundreds of people. How much does she need? 8,000 to get through the winter. Maybe 20 to set her up permanently. And how much does she deserve? Tom smiled. Razor understood. Everything we can give her. Then, that's what she gets. I'll make the calls. How long until you can get home? Bus leaves at noon, gets into Portland around 8 tonight. Perfect. By the time you get here, we'll have a plan. And Tom? Yeah? You did good, brother. This is what the patch means. This is what family does. When Tom walked back to Dorothy's car, she could see something had changed in his demeanor. He moved with purpose now, with the energy of a man who had work to do. Everything all right? She asked as they drove back to the farmhouse. Everything's going to be fine, Tom said. Better than fine. While Dorothy spent Thursday believing she was saying goodbye to the man who'd shared one night of kindness with her, the Hells Angels network was mobilizing across 3 states. Razor's first call was to his road captain, a man called Diesel who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan and understood logistics like most people understood breathing. We need to move fast and move big, Razor told him. This isn't just about helping one woman. This is about showing the world who we really are. Within 2 hours, the word had spread through Portland, then to Seattle, then to chapters in Spokane, Eugene, Sacramento, and San Francisco. The story of Dorothy and her last meal traveled through the Brotherhood network like wildfire, and everywhere it went, it sparked the same response. This was bigger than charity. This was about honor. By Thursday evening, when Tom's bus was still hours from Portland, Razor had received calls from 6 chapter presidents pledging support. Money, supplies, manpower, whatever was needed. The plan that emerged was ambitious. They wouldn't just pay Dorothy's bills and disappear. They would do something that would secure her future and send a message that would ripple far beyond one farmhouse in rural Oregon. Friday morning, while Dorothy was discovering that Tom had left an envelope with $300 and a note saying, "For groceries, until help arrives," Razor was standing in the parking lot of a defunct furniture warehouse, talking to a man who owed the club a significant favor. "I need everything," Razor told him. "Furniture, appliances, electronics, whatever you've got that's quality. And I need it. Loaded and ready to move by tomorrow morning." How much are we talking about, value-wise? 30, 40,000, maybe more. The man whistled low. Razor, that's what it costs to honor someone who honored us. You got a problem with that? No, sir. No problem at all. By Friday afternoon, the convoy was forming. Pickup trucks, panel vans, moving trucks, and of course, motorcycles. Hundreds of them. Members were driving in from as far away as Los Angeles, carrying everything from cash donations to complete household setups. Sarah, Tom's daughter, had contributed $1,000 from her and her husband's savings account. For the woman who helped Daddy, she told Razor. Someone that kind deserves everything good. The local news in Portland got wind of something big happening, but couldn't quite figure out what. All they knew was that Hell's Angels from multiple chapters were converging on the city, and the usual sources were being unusually tight-lipped about the reason. Saturday morning arrived clear and cold. Dorothy woke up in her empty house, used the $300 Tom had left to buy groceries for the first time in weeks, and tried not to think about the fact that she still had 28 days to find a new place to live. She was in her kitchen, actually cooking breakfast with real eggs and real bacon when she heard it. The sound started as a distant rumble, like thunder, but deeper and more sustained. It grew louder steadily, and Dorothy recognized it immediately. Motorcycles. Lots of them. But it couldn't be. Tom was back in Portland by now, probably telling his daughter about the crazy old woman who'd fed him soup in a storm. There was no reason for motorcycles to be coming down her gravel road. The sound grew closer, louder, impossible to ignore. Dorothy walked to her living room window and looked out, and what she saw made her legs go weak. Motorcycles were streaming down her road like a black and chrome river. Dozens of them, then hundreds, filling her driveway, her yard, the road itself. Behind them came trucks, vans, a moving truck, more vehicles than she could count. And walking toward her front door, unmistakable even at a distance, was Tom Mitchell. Dorothy opened her door before Tom could knock, though her hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn the handle. Behind him, spread across her property like an army of leather and chrome, were more people than she'd ever seen in one place. "Tom," she whispered. What is this?" Tom smiled, and it was the warmest expression she'd ever seen on a human face. "This, Dorothy, is what happens when you show kindness to family. Because that's what you are now, family." A massive man approached from behind Tom, and Dorothy recognized the bearing of someone in charge. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a natural leader. "Mrs. Harrison, my name is Marcus Rodriguez. Most people call me Razor. I'm the president of the Portland chapter of the Hells Angels. And I'm here because of what you did for my brother Tom." Dorothy looked past them at the sea of people, at the trucks being unloaded, at the organization and purpose that was unlike anything she'd ever witnessed. "I don't understand," she said. "You fed him when you had no food," Razor said simply. "You sheltered him when you had no room. You gave him everything when you had nothing. That kind of kindness, Mrs. Harrison, that's sacred to us. And we don't forget sacred things." Tom stepped forward. "Dorothy, remember when you asked what help would look like? Well, this is what it looks like." The first truck was being unloaded, and Dorothy watched in amazement as men and women began carrying furniture toward her house. A new refrigerator, a stove, a washer and dryer, a living room set that looked like it belonged in a magazine. "Tom, I can't accept this. It's too much." "You're not accepting it," said a woman who'd approached during the conversation. She was perhaps 50, with kind eyes and the confident bearing of someone used to organizing large efforts. "We're giving it. There's a difference." The woman extended her hand. "I'm Linda Rodriguez, Razor's wife, and Mrs. Harrison, what you did for Tom, that rippled out through our entire community. 6 chapters contributed to this. Nearly 600 people. They all wanted to be part of honoring you." Dorothy looked around at the controlled chaos of her yard being transformed. Men were installing a new heating system. Women were carrying in boxes of food, clothes, linens. Someone was setting up a new television. Someone else was assembling what looked like a complete bedroom set. "This is impossible," Dorothy whispered. "No," Tom said. "This is family. This is what happens when you touch the life of someone who's connected to something bigger than themselves." Razor handed Dorothy an envelope, thick and official-looking. "This is the deed to your house, Mrs. Harrison. Paid in full. The back taxes, the foreclosure, all of it handled. This house is yours, free and clear for as long as you want to live in it. Dorothy's knees gave out. She sat down hard on her porch steps, the envelope clutched in her hands, staring at words that couldn't possibly be real. "There's more," Linda said gently, sitting down beside her. "We've set up a fund. Enough to cover your utilities, your medicine, your groceries, everything you need for the rest of your life. You'll never have to choose between heating and eating again." "But why?" Dorothy's voice was barely a whisper. "I just gave him soup." "You gave him everything," Razor said. "When you had nothing, you gave him everything. That's not just kindness, Mrs. Harrison. That's heroism." The transformation took all day. By the time the sun was setting, Dorothy's house had been completely renovated and refurnished. The empty rooms that had echoed with loss and poverty now glowed with warmth and abundance. The new kitchen was fully stocked with food that would last months. The living room held furniture that would last decades. The bedrooms had been set up with everything she could possibly need, and the bathroom had been updated with fixtures designed for safety and comfort. But more than the material changes, something else had shifted. Dorothy's house, which had felt like a monument to endings, now felt like a celebration of beginnings. Throughout the day, members of the motorcycle club had approached her individually. Each had a story, a reason why her act of kindness mattered to them personally. A veteran who'd been homeless until the club took him in. A woman who'd escaped an abusive marriage with her children and found safety in the brotherhood. A young man whose father had abandoned him, who'd found the family he needed among people society labeled as outcasts. "You represent something," an older woman named Betty told her. "You prove that good people still exist, that kindness isn't dead. We need that proof, Mrs. Harrison. We need to know there are still people like you in the world." As evening approached, most of the convoy prepared to leave. The work was done, the gifts given, the transformation complete. But Tom remained, along with Razor and Linda, and a core group who wanted to make sure Dorothy understood what had happened. They sat around her new dining room table, eating from her fully stocked kitchen, and Dorothy felt something she hadn't experienced since Harold died. She felt like she belonged somewhere again. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you live," Tom said simply. "You enjoy this house. You stay warm. You eat well. You take your medicine. You live the life Harold would have wanted you to live. And us," Linda added, "we stay in touch. Your family now, Mrs. Harrison. Real family. That means birthdays and holidays and Sunday phone calls. That means we check on you and you tell us when you need something. It also means," Razor said with a grin, "that you've got about 600 people who will be very unhappy if anyone ever tries to take advantage of you again." Dorothy looked around the table at these people who'd been strangers 48 hours ago and were now the Diazaverias of Eddie, closest thing to family she had left in the world. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I want an honest answer." "Anything," Tom said. "Why do you think this happened? Really? I mean, I know why you did it. Kindness deserves kindness. But why do you think I was put in a position to help you? Why do you think God or fate or whatever you believe in arranged for a Hell's Angel to break down outside the house of a widow who was about to lose everything?" The table was quiet for a moment. Finally, Razor spoke. "I think," he said slowly, "that sometimes the universe needs to remind us what we're capable of. Both the giving and the receiving. I think your story, Mrs. Harrison, is going to travel far beyond this room, far beyond our club. People need to know that kindness like yours still exists. And people need to know," Tom added, "that brotherhood like ours still exists. That the patches and the leather and the motorcycles don't tell the whole story. That sometimes the people society fears most are the ones who understand honor and loyalty and family better than anyone." That night, after everyone had gone, Dorothy walked through her transformed house in amazement. Every room held evidence of the extraordinary day, but more than that, every room held hope. She found a note on her kitchen counter, written in Tom's handwriting. "Dorothy, you asked me once what family means. Now you know. You're stuck with us. Love, Tom, and all the rest of your new fam." Below it was a phone list with nearly 50 names and numbers. People she could call anytime, day or night. people who considered her family now. The story of Dorothy's last meal and the Brotherhood's response spread quickly through their community and beyond. Local news picked it up first, then regional, then national. The footage of 600 Hells Angels transforming a widow's life went viral, challenging every stereotype and preconception people had about the motorcycle club. But more importantly, the story inspired others. Donations poured in from strangers who wanted to contribute to Dorothy's care. Other motorcycle clubs began organizing similar efforts in their communities. People started looking for their own opportunities to show kindness to strangers. 3 months later, Dorothy received a letter from a young woman in Texas. "Mrs. Harrison, I saw your story on the news. Last week, I saw a homeless man outside my grocery store. Normally, I would have walked past, but I thought about you giving your last meal to a stranger. I bought him lunch, and we talked. Turns out he's a veteran having trouble with his benefits. I helped him navigate the system, and now he has housing and medical care. Thank you for showing me what real kindness looks like." The letters kept coming. Stories of people inspired by Dorothy's example to help strangers, to look past appearances, to choose kindness over fear. Her one act of compassion had created ripples that spread across the country. 6 months after that November night, Dorothy hosted her first annual last meal dinner. The Hells Angels chapters from 3 states attended, along with neighbors, local officials, and dozens of people whose lives had been touched by her story. The tradition continued for 12 more years, until Dorothy passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 79, surrounded by the chosen family she'd gained by sharing a can of soup with a stranger. At her funeral, over 1,000 people attended. Hells Angels from across the country, local residents, people who'd never met her but had been inspired by her story. Tom Mitchell, now in his 70s himself, delivered the eulogy. "Dorothy Harrison proved something important," he said. "She proved that one person, choosing kindness over fear, can change the world. She proved that family isn't just about blood, it's about people who show up when you need them most. And she proved that sometimes angels wear aprons instead of wings, and sometimes they serve soup instead of salvation. But mostly, she proved that the measure of a life isn't what you accumulate, but what you give away." Dorothy gave away her last meal to a stranger, and in return, she received a family, a community, and a legacy that will outlive us all. The Dorothy Harrison Memorial Fund continues to operate today, helping widows and elderly people maintain their independence and dignity. It's funded entirely by Hells Angels chapters and administered by people who understand that kindness, once given freely, has an obligation to keep traveling. And every year, on the anniversary of that November storm, members gather at Dorothy's farmhouse, now a community center, to share a meal and remember the night a poor widow fed a starving biker her last meal, and 600 Hells Angels showed up to return the favor. Because that's what family does. That's what honor means. And that's what happens when kindness meets kindness, and strangers become family, and one act of love creates a legacy that echoes through generations. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that good people still exist and that kindness still matters, share it with someone who needs to remember that angels come in all forms. Share it with someone who needs to believe that one person can make a difference. Because Dorothy Harrison proved it's true. One person, one choice, one act of kindness can change everything. Sometimes the people we're taught to fear are the ones who understand honor best. Sometimes the weakest among us are the strongest. And sometimes, when you give everything you have to someone who needs it, the universe finds a way to give everything back. That's not just a story. That's a promise. That's hope. That's proof that love still wins, kindness still matters, and family, real family, shows up when you need them most. Even if they arrive on 600 motorcycles, wearing leather and patches, carrying the message that honor and brotherhood and love are still alive in this world. This story follows the exact emotional framework and storytelling style of your inspiration pieces while creating a completely new narrative about Dorothy, the poor widow, and Tom, the Hells Angel she helps. The script builds from intimate crisis through explosive brotherhood response to lasting transformation, maintaining the campfire storytelling voice throughout. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.